Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday, March 11th, 2021 special called Board of Education meeting. We are going to open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation with Mr. Reverend Dennis Goodwin.
And a little instruction, there is not a comma after one nation.
I noticed that.
And you've noticed I say it correctly?
You do.
So I'm expecting the same. Join me.
Bear with us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well done. Let's pray. Father, impart upon us your wisdom. Watch over all of our students, build a hedge of protection around them this day and every day. Watch over our staff, our teachers, all those who make it happen. And we pray, Lord, that the decisions we make would be the best decisions that our minds can come up with, but that the result would be the best for all those who make it happen, who do the work, and who receive the instruction. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Good job. All right, moving right along. The first item on our agenda is a consideration to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
Reverend Goodwin has moved to approve the meeting agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Chadwick has seconded this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Now we're going to move on to the consideration of opening our schools, transitioning of middle and high schools from Plan B to Plan A. Anybody want to make a motion on this? Well, actually, Dr. Jackson. Testing you.
I'm good.
Testing you, and it worked
Had
out.
to reset that record for how long a meeting lasts.
Zero motion.
I understand that completely. Board members, thank you again for gathering. I appreciate the amount of time that has been spent in the last month and a half in terms of board members' time in meetings and working together. I don't know that any of us knew that we would have so many opportunities to work together, but I certainly appreciate all that you do in being here and being ready to go. And so in just a moment, we'll be pulling up the presentation and we'll be ready to go. As you know, while we're waiting for Mike to pull that presentation up, boom, the presentation was up. Thank you, Mike. So we were waiting for me to click the button. As you know, things change rapidly and have changed rapidly throughout this school year. As late as Tuesday, Ms. Chadwick and Chairman Jenkins and myself, along with Christine Hanks, a parent in the county, and our student from East Carteret High School, William Chadwick, were in Raleigh advocating for House Bill 90, hoping to be able to use the vehicle of a local bill to have the opportunity to consider Plan A for our middle schools and high schools. While we were there, we heard a press conference given by Senator Berger, in which he talked about there was ongoing negotiations with the governor and Senate and House leadership about the possibility of this opportunity. Very quickly thereafter, the next day, we received notification there would be a press conference at 11 o'clock. And so because of that, we have the opportunity to be here. And again, I appreciate your flexibility and willingness to come together on short notice so that we can consider this opportunity. As we kind of move forward, it's very important to really understand where we are and our opportunities. As you know, throughout this year, we've been guided by the Strong Schools NC Public Health Toolkit that's published and routinely revised by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. As those revisions come out, each of our schools go back through the revisions, reviewing all of the requirements, the new requirements, the requirements that have dropped off to ensure that we are following those safety, health, and wellness protocols. I sincerely believe that the low case count across Carteret County is in portion anyway, and maybe in large portion, due to the conscientious and careful work of the men and women serving in our school system who are working so hard to ensure that we are following the 3 Ws, that we're following all the recommendations. The Lighting Our Way Forward document has not been updated as recently. That's a document that came to us from the Department of Public Instruction and certainly provided guidance as well. From the beginning, we were guided by Governor Cooper's executive orders. In fact, we're 2 days away from the first anniversary of his first executive order, where we were called together on a Saturday. I remember being in my driveway, washing the car, and received notice through a text message that the governor was about to speak and I needed to hear it, ran inside the house. And he announced at that time that we'd be closing schools for 2 weeks. 2 days from now, we'll have our 1-year anniversary. I don't know anybody that could have anticipated that we would be here today. But through those governor's executive orders, we've received orders like last summer, we were directed as a school system to develop plans A, B, and C. And we did that work, and you'll remember the 6-hour meeting the board had to review those plans A, B, and C as we prepared for the start of the year. As we've gone through the year, we've had opportunities for changes. And one of the, I think, demonstrations that we've seen through our school system, through our Board of Education, is a willingness to be innovative, a willingness to be flexible, and a willingness to pivot. Because we have made changes as we've gone along, as we've been able to make changes, and I appreciate that. The school system, as you described to me early in the interview process, has always been cutting edge and doing what's right for students. And I think we've continued to demonstrate throughout this school year what it is to be Carteret strong. And so that brings us to this moment, Session Law 220. Session Law 220, prior to yesterday, had different language in it. It's now the result of those negotiations between the governor and the Senate and House leadership. It passed the Senate by a vote of 49-0. One senator had an excused absence. It may have been 50-0. It passed the House 119-0 and has just been sent to the governor. We anticipate that the governor would sign that perhaps today. In his press conference, he indicated at least by the end of the week. And so any decisions we make today would be predicated on the passage of Session Law 220. And of course, at that time, it would become Statute 2021- whatever it would become. A very quick review of Session Law or Senate Bill 220. Again, it has passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, and so we do anticipate the governor approving it. It requires all K-5 schools across the state to open in Plan A 21 days from the bill signing, which will be according to the information that they shared with the information that came after spring break for most. As you know, our elementary schools have been in Plan A since October. It goes forward to say that it allows grades 6 through 12 to operate in either Plan A or Plan B for the rest of the school year. Our schools have been operating, our middle schools and high schools, in Plan B since the start of this school year. And so functionally, we've already met the requirements of Session Bill 220. It goes on to say that if an LEA, a local education authority, or in this case, the school system, wants to move grade 6-12 under Plan A, it must submit a plan to DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, but the plan cannot be rejected. It must agree to participate with the ABC Collaborative for data monitoring. At this time, because this is happening so quickly, we do not know what template DHHS would want us to report this plan under. And so it's my intention that if the board moves forward, that we will report to DHHS our plan, and if they want it in a specific template, then we'll go back and submit it the way they'd like it to be submitted. It also states again that we have to agree to participate with the ABC Collaborative for data monitoring. The ABC Collaborative is led by Duke University, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and has done a lot of research around what's going on. And it's that research that's really allowed us to come to this moment, to understand the impact of students not being in schools. And so being a part of that data monitoring, we certainly really have no problem with and look forward to, because we want our data to help inform the decisions made going forward. The data, I reached out to the ABC Collaborative. They, of course, are scrambling to put together the data that they would be asking for in the format they'd want to be asking for it. In general, it sounds like much of the data that we've been collecting. We have a comprehensive data sharing through our website, where each week we share the number of school-affected cases we might have. We share actually the locations of where those cases were. We do maintain confidentiality where we have to, but we've, I believe, done a great job being very transparent and sharing information, and we'll continue to do that. There may be data that they ask for that we haven't collected to date, and so we do know that that could be time intensive, and that information flow would go through our school nurses, and certainly our school nurses have just been absolutely champions throughout this process and all they're doing. The Senate Bill 220 goes on to say that in grades 6 through 12, students with IEPs or 504s, that we must offer an option for Plan A if the parents request it. And so at least for those students, we have to offer Plan A. Moving forward, it does say that we must continue the remote-only option for students whose parents request that. We have had a remote-only option throughout the school year, and of course would continue to have that. Forward, it says that it would allow LEAs to adjust their 2020-2021 calendar to accommodate teacher workdays for planning for these shifts ahead of them occurring if needed. And so they have given the opportunity to adjust our school calendar to add teacher workdays if we need to do so to make changes to our operation. And then finally, the governor retains the authority to close schools, but would have to do it by county or district and not through a single statewide closure for the remainder of this school year. And so at that point, if the governor needed to make that decision, it would be on a county by county or district by district basis, as opposed to the entire state being closed down at one time. And I certainly appreciate that, because we'd much rather have decisions made based on our context and what's happening here in Carteret County. Very quickly going forward, a vaccine update. We've been working very closely with Carteret County and the health department to get our teachers vaccinated just as quickly as possible. Other vaccinations have also popped up in other counties or through local pharmacies. And so we have had staff members take advantage of that. We're very excited about that. And so the numbers going through our health department mass clinic have actually come down, as some staff members have availed themselves of other opportunities. And so we certainly appreciate that. Right now, approximately, and it's approximate because we're asking for the data collection once the teachers have had both shots in the vaccine. There is a one-shot vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. I believe I heard that 80,000 of those had been received in the state, but it'd be some time before any of those arrived in Carteret County. But once the teachers have had both, we are asking the teachers to share with the school nurse, or here for a student or for staff members who work outside of schools, we'll share it with Mr. Probst, their vaccination card. We'll keep that confidentially, and then of course destroy it after the pandemic passes. But the purpose for that is to help us with our contact tracing and with our quarantining protocols. But at this time, we believe, based on the information we've received, that approximately 200 plus employees have received their first dose. Tomorrow, we're extremely excited about the opportunity for our school system mass vaccination clinic. That'll take place in the old Kmart, where the health department is giving vaccines, and we're looking forward to that. Tomorrow is a teacher work day, and so that worked out really well on the calendar. And so I will be there, and I know there will be a lot of cheering as the rest of our staff members have their opportunity to be vaccinated. And so we certainly know that that's certainly a good thing going forward. Going into kind of where we've been as we go forward, as you know, again, we were required to develop Plan A, B, and C back last summer. So this is something that we've been working on for a long time, not knowing when or if we would have the opportunity to use any of those plans. On August 17th, we opened our school year. All of our schools were operating on Plan B. We did have the 100% virtual option for our parents, and that has continued throughout the year. On September 17th, the governor announced that elementary schools could transition to Plan A on or after October 5th. If the local board made that decision, and on October 19th, all of our elementary schools began operating on Plan A, our middle schools and high schools continued to operate on Plan B, which is the most that they could do under the requirements at that time. And again, the 100% virtual remained available. On January 6th, and I think this is a perfect demonstration of, one, the board's absolute desire to keep our students and staff safe and healthy. The Board of Education made the determination to temporarily shift our schools to Plan C, and you retain that opportunity throughout the school year in anticipation of the post-holiday case spike that we actually did wind up seeing in Carteret County. And I appreciate the board's willingness to pivot in that moment to make that decision to keep our students and staff safe. And I know that, God forbid, we need to do that again, that you would be willing to do that. And I do appreciate that. On January 19th, we returned to our elementary schools operating on Plan A. The middle schools went back to Plan B, and 100% virtual continued to be available. Yesterday, or March 10th rather, Governor Cooper announced that school systems may allow, through this now Senate Bill 220, middle schools and high schools to transition to Plan A on or after blank. And the reason the blank is there is that we're waiting for him to actually sign that into law. In Senate Bill 220, we have to meet the requirements within 21 days. Of course, we meet those requirements based on where we are already. However, it does go on to say that school systems may move quicker than that. And so we do have that opportunity once he signs that and that becomes law. And so considering moving our middle schools and high schools to Plan A, like our elementary schools are, as a review of Plan A to give you a feel for that, under Plan A, our student and staff health and wellness protocols, the wellness checks continue. So until they're changed, we will continue to take temperatures before someone walks into the building. We continue to ask the questions about exposure or quarantine before students or staff members come in. We continue to take temperatures in this building. So every morning as we walk in, we have our temperature checked at the front door, and we're doing that in all of our facilities. I've laughed and said some days I have my temperature checked 7 to 9 times a day based on how many schools I visit, and that's okay because I appreciate all of our schools are absolutely dedicated to doing exactly what they need to do. Under Plan A, we are still required to social distance in public spaces, and the definition of that social distancing under Plan A, which is different than Plan B and even Plan C, is to the extent possible. And so to the extent possible, we'll continue to social distance. That would be in areas like the lobby and the hallways and the cafeteria, et cetera. We would social distance to the extent possible. Face coverings remain a requirement for students and staff, and they're doing a wonderful job with that. Early on, we had some concerns about how that would go with our students, but it has not been an issue at all, and so we appreciate that. We do have hand sanitizer readily available. We continue to emphasize hand washing, and we do have ongoing disinfection of high-touch areas under Plan A. There are 2 major changes. The big major change in our building is that 6-foot spacing limit in the classrooms goes away under Plan A. We will social distance as much as possible, and so we will separate the students as much as we possibly can, but we recognize that it won't be 6 feet based on the number of students in our classrooms. And so that's the biggest difference with Plan A. There's also a major change on the buses. Under Plan B, we're only allowed to have 1 student per bus seat unless it's members of the same family. Under Plan A, that limitation goes away as well. We will social distance as much as possible. On a bus that may not have as many students, we would sit the students 1 per seat, but could seat 2 or even up to 3 students per seat. We've certainly seen that in our elementary schools as we continue to run our buses. And so looking specifically at our middle schools and high schools, and really thinking about this in 4 areas, the potential to move our middle schools and high schools to Plan A. 1, I'd like to briefly share about the educational experience for our students. 2, talk about transportation. 3, talk about a possible timeline. And then finally, talk about the necessary communication. And so under our educational experience, thinking specifically about our middle schools and high schools, unlike our elementary schools where teachers are either face-to-face or virtual. Now, there's some crossover there with our EC teachers who may have both, or if there's a quarantine situation, a teacher may still be helping a student virtually who's been quarantined. Overall, in the elementary schools, the teachers are either face-to-face or virtual. The middle schools and high schools, though, that's not the case. In our middle schools, it's almost exclusively that every middle school teacher is teaching both face-to-face and virtually. We do have students who are 100% virtual in the middle schools and high schools, and certainly elementary schools as well. Based on that need for our teachers to serve our 100% virtual students to the best of their ability to ensure meeting the needs of those students, the remote learning day that we've had on Wednesdays is a request from our staff and our administration that we continue to have their remote learning day on Wednesdays, at least as we transition to Plan A, if that's the desire of the board to do so. From the standpoint of that remote learning day on Wednesday allows the teachers who are teaching both face-to-face and virtual the opportunity to focus exclusively on the virtual teachers. The bell schedules at the schools will be very similar to what they currently have. Each school will have to do some schedule changes based on students or parents' preference to come back to face-to-face or go to virtual to ensure that we have all of our classroom numbers the way they need to do. But in the end, our bell schedules will be very similar for our middle schools and high schools. In terms of transportation, we'll continue our wellness checks before the students are seated on the bus. We'll strive to maintain one student per seat, but again, may operate with multiple students per seat. The committee that gathered, as you'll remember, we had 7 committees of 70+ staff members last summer who put together our plans A, B, and C for the district. The transportation committee that we recommended we have a limit of 2 students per seat, but recognized under Plan A, we would potentially have to have 3 students per seat. We've certainly had to do that in some of our elementary schools. Face coverings, of course, are required. Some schools will need to operate double routes even going forward under Plan A. Some of that certainly is the need for additional bus drivers. We have been working with the Department of Transportation to try to speed up the process to get our bus drivers licensed, and we'll continue that work so we can get more bus drivers and hopefully less need for double routes in the school system. And so transitioning to a potential timeline should the board determine to move the middle schools and high schools to Plan A. Today, March 11th, the schools, if the board makes this decision, the schools will begin communicating with parents. We want to move as rapidly as possible because we certainly want to get our students in school. And so I've worked with all of our middle school and high school principals, and we'll begin today. We'll send out district messaging, and then schools will work from the school level to communicate with parents to give the parents the opportunity to transition into face-to-face learning or back to virtual learning. Part of the Senate Bill 220 requires that parents have that opportunity, and so certainly we want to give them that opportunity. But we need to know their plans as quickly as possible so that we can make sure we're ready to get the schools transitioned. Moving forward, it's our recommendation that the high schools begin to operate on Plan A on March 22nd. So that's a week from Monday. That gives the high schools the opportunity to make any schedule changes they need to make, be able to make any bus route changes they need to make. Additionally, it gives them the opportunity to work with parents to assure parents, both in cohort A and cohort B, the safety protocols that we have in place to give them an opportunity to make good decisions. And we certainly would love to see all of our students in class face-to-face. For our middle schools, the recommendation is that they start on March 29th, which is 2 weeks from Monday. The middle school principals, all of our middle school principals felt strongly that they would need that time period to be able to do all of the schedule changing, the moving of furniture, the bus route changing, getting ready for their students to return, all the students to return. And so the recommendation, again, for high schools would be they would move to Plan A on March 22nd, and the middle schools would move to Plan A on March 29th. And so what that looks like, this is a calendar for the month of March. As you'll see, we have the remote learning days on Wednesdays, as we've had for our middle schools and high schools throughout the school year. Our elementary schools are 5 days a week, and so they're not using that remote learning day on Wednesdays. There is a teacher work day on the 12th. That's tomorrow. We are approaching the end of the 9 weeks, and so one of the um, opportunities or challenges for all of our teachers is that we're also right on top of a grading period. And so what that means is teachers are finalizing grades, they're printing report cards, they actually print those and review the drafts. And so all of that work will be happening at the same time as this transition work. And so that's another one of the challenges we have. However, we do believe we can mitigate that. And so again, the 22nd, we would roll to high school Plan A, and the 29th, middle school on Plan A as well. And then right after that, of course, we have spring break starting on Friday, April 2nd. In the final area to kind of talk about, and then be happy to answer any questions the board may have, or get out of the way of the board to kind of work through this. We certainly need to do a great job informing our parents of the plan. I'm sure board members have received emails and communication from parents who are excited about the opportunity for students to return to school, and I certainly appreciate those as well. We will communicate with parents to allow them to share their preference so that we can plan around that, and then begin to communicate changes. So schedule changes for individual students, bus route changes for individual students and families, and then we'll continue to do a great job with that. The one thing I would mention is that there was some conversation about if we had, with the high schools going back 1 week earlier, the middle schools going back a week later, if we had a situation in a family where the high school student was, the family's depending on the high school student to monitor the middle school student during that week, the high school student would have the opportunity to remain at home to be able to take care of their middle school sibling for that week until the middle schools return to Plan A. And so finally, I'd like to talk with the board for just a moment about our quarantine options. As you know, the quarantine options, and certainly that was a discussion that we've had many times, have been, well, there's been a lot of changes throughout the year, recommendations from the CDC and DHHS, and specifically with close contacts. The CDC has recommended the 14-day quarantine, however, gave the opportunity for the option of a 10-day quarantine or a 7-day quarantine. With a 10-day quarantine, the student or staff member has to daily monitor. They have a form they have to fill out, and if they've done that and they've had no symptoms, then they can return after 10 days. The 7-day option is allowed for someone to return after 7 days if they've had no symptoms and they have a test, a negative test, on or after the day 5 within 48 hours of their return. Our nurses report that those conversations with families can take up to 20 minutes each, because working through all of those pieces and the rapid test and the antigen test and when that test has to take place can be quite confusing. And so it really takes a lot of time to work through those. And then you could have a situation where in a classroom, if the entire classroom were quarantined, then you have teachers and students who all are being quarantined 7, 10, or 14 days. And so with that myriad of options happening, and it has to be monitored on a daily basis because they can change from one to the other as they go, it just becomes incredibly time consuming with the contact tracing, et cetera. In the middle schools and high schools, because students move back and forth between multiple classes, the numbers of students who could be quarantined if required, and we certainly hope the case count continues to go down and goes to 0 and stays at 0, could become quite large in terms of the numbers. And so it's the recommendation of our school nurses, and I believe they reached out to the board to share directly with you. Their recommendation would be that we temporarily suspend the 7-day quarantine option for close contacts. And so as we move to Plan A, if that's the board's desire for middle school and high school, that we would have available for close contacts the 10-day option, as long as they're symptom-free and they are daily monitoring and they submit that paperwork, or the 14-day option. And again, that would be a temporary suspension that the board could come back and look at, depending on how things are going as we move forward. And so all that to wrap up with this recommendation, as allowed by the governor and Senate Bill 220, after working with the principals, seeking feedback from school system staff members, working with the cabinet staff, it is my recommendation to the Board of Education that our high schools transition to Plan A beginning on March 22nd, our middle schools transition to Plan A beginning on March 29th, and I further recommend the school system suspend temporarily anyway, the use of the 7-day quarantine option for close contacts. Mr. Chair, be happy to answer any questions or get out of the way of the board for your dialogue.
Anybody have any questions? Travis does.
Of course I do. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. First of all, I want to say I think we are very fortunate in Carteret County that we are getting this recommendation to go to Plan A so quickly. A lot of schools systems are probably debating, are we going to go to Plan A? Or are we going to go to say Plan B? So that isn't an issue for us at all. I am very happy that we are on top of things and we are moving forward to get our kids back in school as quickly as possible. So first of all, that is awesome. Kudos. Thank you very much. Do have a couple questions. One, I'd like to know these dates, the March 22nd and the March 29th, rather than the days that those the recommended days that we do start these, or could these dates serve as deadlines where if for whatever reason it appeared that our schools were ready to go sooner than this, that they would have the option to be able to do that?
The answer to that is absolutely. I think that for planning purposes for families, it might be easier to say, I know I'm coming back on this day, but certainly the board could make the determination that by this date, the school will transition, and that would give that opportunity if schools are ready.
Okay. Thank you. And then the other thing, I'm not a fan of the last recommendation of suspending the 7-day quarantine. I think we're going backwards. We're going forward and everything else, and on that one, we're going backwards. The CDC is already extremely cautious with its recommendations, and I don't think we need to go any further and go backwards on this particular recommendation.
Thank you, sir.
Regarding that comment on the 7-day recommendation, our nurses, I'm asking, are our nurses solely responsible for the contact tracing?
They really do bear the lion's share of that. Our administrators try to help, but because we're really talking about medical issues, our nurses are medical experts within the school system. And so they do bear the lion's share of that. And in addition to this year, the contact tracing and the keeping track of the quarantines, they have all the normal work of a school nurse with taking care of students with tree nut allergies and the number of diabetic students that we have and just the health needs of our students. That's quite an intensive job anyway. And on top of that, they have this year the contact tracing and the quarantining and then tracking the quarantining. And then, of course, communicating with teachers of when a student might be expected back. And then that becomes, of course, even more so because students in a classroom could be coming back at different times based on the various options. But to answer your question, yes, sir, they are carrying the lion's share of that work.
I have a question. It's probably for Ms. Carswell, actually. Are we able to use CARES Act money to offset some of the responsibilities that our school nurses are having, as in hiring someone to help or fill that position short term so that they're not contact tracing all day, every day when they also have another job to fulfill?
We're actually trying to hire the contract nurse company that we work with. We're trying to hire an additional nurse so that, say, a school has a whole class that they're going to, that nurse could go help there with the triage and calling. So we're trying to do that.
Okay.
Get one hired.
Okay, thank you.
I personally think we've already seen a whole lot of excessive quarantining as it is. And I think in certain cases, the contact tracing has gone overboard as far as trying to quarantine for every little itty bitty, look at somebody the wrong way, touch them on the shoulder, things like that. I think it's been overboard for a long time, and I don't want to perpetuate any further excessive quarantining.
And I don't disagree with you, but when you think about what our nurses have done for the past year is unbelievable, the amount of work we've had with them. And when you said temporarily suspend, are you talking about a week, 2 weeks, a month through the end of the school?
I really haven't put a timeline to that, but just to allow us to move forward and see what happens, to compare our case count. If our case count's going down, if we have fewer cases, then the time requirement certainly goes down as well. And so with everything, as we've certainly pivoted many times throughout the school year, we certainly have the opportunity to continue to pivot in any of these decisions. And that's a part of Senate Bill 220, that the board could determine now to move the middle schools and high schools to Plan A, and then determine later to move them back to Plan B if that's the will of the board. And so any of that, I think, is absolutely wide open, particularly as we continue to see how our case count, and we hope, continues to go down the way it has been.
I spoke with 6 nurses on the way here this morning from elementary, middle, and high school from each, and all of them said they feel like currently the 7-day option, and I agreed to it initially, and I think everyone did, it is hurting them right now more than helping. If we can't get them help, they are truly struggling with the 7-day option right now.
Cool. How fast can we find out, Kathy, if we're going to be able to maybe use some CARES money or get some additional assistance? Our kids have been out of school enough as it is. I mean, I don't even want to give them 3 days more to tell them they're going to have to be out of school because they were a close contact for somebody, for this. I mean.
We have already told the vendor to seek a contract nurse, so it'll be on their end. Usually it's a week to 2 weeks, the time they find somebody in order to fill that position.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And just to put this into context, Travis, I've been on the fence about the 7-day thing since we talked about it last night. But I did a little bit of due diligence. And to me, I think as of yesterday, we had maybe 50 cases in Carteret County out of 70,000 people. So I am going to be the eternal optimist, be cautiously optimistic, and think that even if we temporarily suspend 7 days, that cases are not going to be an issue. I'm going to knock on wood just in case. But I think it's just a temporary suspension. It doesn't hold anybody to anything. But if it gives them some relief, bring everybody back, which is our ultimate goal, let's temporarily help them bring everybody back, because our ultimate goal is to get our kids back in school. And I get what you're saying. I'm all about it. I've dealt with it just like you have. But the bigger picture is, let's get our kids back in school and help them do that as quickly as possible. And then if we need to revisit it in 2 weeks or whatever, we'll revisit it.
So can we put a deadline then and say, hey, we're going to do a temporary for 2 weeks and then we're back?
Well, I'd rather not put a deadline. What I'd like to do is I would like to just know that we have the ability to do it and just sort of see, because it may be not necessary. It may be that, like I said, by the end of this school year, we have 0 cases in Carteret County. Again, cautious optimism, but that's how I roll. We have the ability to change it if necessary. And if it becomes problematic, we'll do it. I mean, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they are the boots on the ground, and let's get our kids back in school. And if that's what helps get them back quickly, I mean, let's trust in them.
But with the county, the cases dropping, they've got contact tracers at the health department, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, is there people that we could hire to be contact tracers?
But one of the things, and I just wanted to mention to the question about getting the contract nurse as soon as possible from the vendor, I've been in meetings with Mr. Case, who's the hospital president, with Dr. Mancini about the shortage of nurses. And certainly, as you know, we've maintained a list of vacancies throughout this school year. And so just like many industries, we're having a hard time filling all of our vacancies. And so while I would love to bring in folks to help and love to have them start this afternoon, we've had a tough time finding folks to be able to do that work. And so I wouldn't want to say we know we can do that if we don't know we can do that. But if that is something that the board would like us to explore, we certainly will do that, and we'll continue to work with the vendor to encourage them to spare no effort to bring in that nurse. In terms of working with the county, as their case count comes down, they may have, I would assume, opportunity to assist in the contact tracing that happens through the school system. And we would certainly absolutely welcome that help and love to have that help. I know that the county staff seem to be extremely involved in the mass vaccination clinics for community members. And so it may very well be that they may be moving contact tracers to the phone booth or the phone banks to make sure that vaccines go forward. And so we will certainly reach out to the county and accept any help they can give us. But again, we very much appreciate the partnership with the health department and all they've done for our school system this year.
Does it have to necessarily be a nurse to contact trace? I mean,
It does not necessarily have to be a nurse. It does have to be somebody who really has a deep understanding of all of the options. You've seen the graphics, and we're just talking about close contacts. That's to say nothing about symptomatic folks or folks who may have someone in the household who's symptomatic or who've tested positively. All of those graphics, there's so many different outcomes that you just have to have somebody who really understands that. And then when we reach out to parents or even to staff members to share with them the need to quarantine and they ask questions, we need to have somebody who's available or who's able to ask those questions, or at least who would then forward them to the nurse. But no, it does not have to be a school nurse, but it does have to be somebody who can really understand in a way that they can actually communicate the process and protocols.
Am I correct in understanding that people, staff who have been vaccinated will be exempt from contact tracing?
Thank you. That's a great question. And so what we've been told is that 10 days following the second shot for the Pfizer or the Moderna, or 10 days following the single shot from Johnson & Johnson, when that becomes available, someone is considered fully vaccinated. At that point, they would not have to quarantine as a close contact, unless they were symptomatic, which changes. Of course, you go back to the graphic at that point. But 10 days past the last shot, either the second shot or the only shot, if it's Johnson & Johnson, they would no longer have to quarantine as a close contact, which is why we're asking our staff to share their vaccination card with our school nurse so that we know that that person has been fully vaccinated. They're 10 days past that second shot, and then we'd be able to not have them quarantine as a close contact unless they were symptomatic.
For students who have been out of school as long as they have, I personally wouldn't want to be one of the people who tells a parent, I know your kid's been out of school as long as they have. I know that they've tested negative for COVID. I know that the CDC says it's fine to do 7 days with a negative test, but Carteret County isn't willing to do that. And I don't know if it's a matter of just the workload. I'm happy to try to get the staff additional help on the workload, but I don't want to be that person. I would like to ask, if we're going to vote on this, if there's a possibility of treating that separate as far as trying to consider what we have here as far as our return to learn.
I think the simple fact that the nurses have asked for it, that they've been the ones that have worked on it, it would be really difficult for me to take that out, especially if we're talking temporarily, 2 weeks, a month, or whatever. If we're willing to revisit it, it would be.
We're going to put this on pause for a few weeks to get the kids back.
The 7-day quarantine?
Yes.
I don't know how long. I don't think we're willing to make a deadline right now, but I mean, I think, my gosh, if there's anything we can do for our nurses, I think this is the easiest thing to do.
If we said 2 weeks to a pause to kind of see how things play out and all that, all right. But I know how pauses happen, and pauses turn into permanent things. It happens with all kinds of stuff. So I'd rather actually go ahead and say, let's do a 2-week pause and then see if it's necessary. But
If I might, and thank you. So let me add to my previous statement. As I shared, this contact tracing and quarantining is quite intense. One of the pieces I should have mentioned is that you don't have to quarantine if you're 10 days past being fully vaccinated, but that not have to quarantine as a close contact only lasts for 90 days past the 10 days. And so if you're 101 days past being fully vaccinated, you have to quarantine again as a close contact. And so as we've talked about many times, our school system is full of rule followers, and that's what we want. And so I appreciate them working really hard. In terms of the opportunity to revisit, if the board wants to put a date on that, that's absolutely fine. We do report all of our cases on a weekly basis through the website. And so certainly you have that opportunity to, on a weekly basis, see exactly where we are with our cases, and at any point could ask us to bring that up for the board to consider again. The 2-week piece, I would just remind the board that we're almost at spring break. And so I would ask, if we're thinking about 2 weeks, at least let us get 2 weeks on plan A, if that's the thought around a specific date. And then certainly if you want to go with a specific date, just to be thoughtful around that spring break and how much time we've actually been on plan A. But again, this is completely up to the board, and we'll do our best to make it happen.
Could offer compromise that we because it'll work with your timeline, that we look at this again at our next regular meeting.
It's in 3 school weeks.
Mhm.
Our April meeting would be 3 school weeks in spring break.
I think that's a great compromise.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Next meeting is the 13th, correct?
Yes, sir. The Tuesday after spring break.
Thank you, sorry.
I'm really thankful we got to be here so quickly, and I know that's thanks to our principals, and every email and speech sent got us here. The ones responsible for the execution of the plans met, I know, and I know I haven't had to make a seating chart or a bus route or moved a piece of furniture this year. So the ones that have to execute this plan have asked for their start dates, and I don't feel I'm any more equipped to tell them how to run their school than we are. So today is really easy for me. And I would love to make the motion to move forward with the plan as presented by Dr. Jackson to return to Plan A under the presented framework.
I'd like to ask a few more questions before we get there. This is probably an incredibly loaded question.
Ms. Wheatley, if I may.
Oh, I'm so
Apologize for
sorry.
interrupting.
Sorry.
Mr.
Yep.
Chair, do you want to see if there's a second and then entertain
Is
discussion?
that what I'm supposed to do?
You have a motion on the floor, so
I have a motion by Ms. Statler. Do I have a second?
I will second.
And we have a second by Mr. McLean. All in favor?
I think we can,
Oh,
discussion.
okay,
I think we can
discuss.
discuss, yeah.
I apologize, Ms. Wheatley.
No, it's okay. I just have a few more questions. Like I said, this is probably an incredibly loaded question. As far as I know, especially for middle and high school, they are going to continue to have virtual students as well. And that's due to certification laws, especially in middle school, because you're going to have 6th grade math. They're only teaching 6th grade math. They can't teach the whole realm of middle school. Virtual academy. Is there some way that we can put those students in an actual county-wide virtual academy so that we're not limiting our school, those teachers to teach every single class all day long with full classrooms as well as their virtual students? Is that an option?
It is an option, and it's something we're looking at very heavily to put in place this summer going into next school year, so we wouldn't have the situation where we have teachers who are teaching both virtually and face-to-face. With about 10 weeks left of school, if we made that move at this point, we would really have a big transition for students and staff because we're already down to the last 9 weeks of school. And so we'd be hard pressed to make that happen before the end of the school year. Certainly we'll do anything the board asks us to do. But going into next school year, that we've already had those conversations and are continuing to have those conversations, assuming that we're going to be required to continue to have that option for parents.
But that's the purpose of having the virtual day, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly right. That's
I think what my question was if we could, if going forward, if we could have virtual students within a virtual academy, then our students could go 5 days a week.
Sure.
That's my hope.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something we want to do if we have to do this next year. But right now,
Will you anticipate this being a part of our program going forward? That's a tough question.
I tend to be like our chairman, and I'm crazy optimistic, so I'm hoping not. But as I understand, the vaccine is yet to be approved for people under the age of 18, and that'll occur sometime next year based on what I heard from Dr. Cohen. And so at least until our students have had the opportunity to have the vaccine, this may very well be a part of our ongoing work. And to Ms. Wheatley's point, if we can set up this virtual academy during the summer, then we would have teachers in the middle school and high school like the elementary school. It's a bit more challenging because of the certification issues, particularly at the middle school, but they only taught virtual. And if that's the case, those teachers could teach virtual 5 days a week, and our face-to-face teachers could teach face-to-face 5 days a week. And so we would have a more typical experience in the classroom for our students.
I just like to, relieve some of those stresses and
Absolutely.
And that's a
Thank you.
good point, Brittany, thank you. So in addition to changing, we talked about changing instead of beginning on March 22nd, beginning on March 29th, saying beginning by March 22nd, by 29th, in case somebody was feeling like they could do earlier. But I also had a question about the 4 days. If any of our schools felt that they could handle doing, if they wanted the extra instruction, face-to-face time for our students, and the virtual learning day wasn't as crucial for them, if certain schools felt that they could do, they needed and wanted to get 5 days, do they have that option?
Well, absolutely. You know, I think we've demonstrated many times throughout the year the willingness to pivot if it's in the best interest of our students. And so as we go forward under Plan A, if that's the will of the board, then the opportunity to continue to improve upon our work is always there. And so all of those changes are certainly available. And we hope it wouldn't happen. But we could also move back to Plan B if we had to. And so moving forward to more and more face-to-face instruction is certainly what we want. And so that is an opportunity, we hope. But that's what I appreciate about Senate Bill 220 is that it returns that decision-making authority to the local Board of Education. So this board, elected by the citizens of Carteret County, get to make that decision in the best interest of Carteret County and the children and families of Carteret County. And so the answer is absolutely. And with the passage of this Senate bill, this board has that authority, and I very much appreciate that.
So would we have to wait until the board decides, or would the schools bypassing? I would like to be able to give them the option in passing of our passing of the motion today that says, yes, by the 22nd, by the 29th. And, you know, if you have the option to maintain that 4 day, that Wednesday virtual day, but if you can handle and you think it would be beneficial for the students, you don't have to that you would be able to do that without us kind of starting from scratch and saying the entire school system has to do it. I know the middle schools have a lot more going on. It's a lot more problematic for them. And I think they're going to need that virtual day to be able to handle the virtual students that they have at the middle school level. But it may be the case at the high school level that the high schools actually can do 5 days a week. They may want a transition period where they go 4 days a week for a couple of weeks or so, a few weeks to make sure they got a handle on everything. But in order to get all the learning that they feel like they need to get to their students, they may say, look, we would love to at so-and-so school, high school or wherever, we would like to be able to go ahead and let our kids go 5 days a week for the month of April and May without feeling like they're unable to do that. Do they have that option? Will they have that option as of today?
Not the way.
Interestingly, yeah, I was just going to say, so is it available? Yes. The board could give or delegate its authority to make that decision to the superintendent or even to the principals if that's the will of the board. And so my recommendation would be that as we fought so hard for that authority to be given to the Board of Education, that if a school felt like we're ready for 5 days a week, that we bring that back to the Board of Education for your deliberation and consideration. The board could delegate that authority to the superintendent or to the principals. And so that's certainly on the table. In terms of the on those dates or by those dates, there's a motion on the floor, but you could certainly offer or request a friendly amendment or deal with that as a separate motion. So that's still, I know we're still having discussion.
I would love to offer a friendly amendment to say by March 22nd, by 29th. And I'd also like to offer a friendly amendment and I'd like to hear discussion on it, but if there's any reason why we shouldn't do this, but it seems like to me, it wouldn't be a bad thing to allow our kids to go back 5 days rather than 4 days. So I would love to be able to delegate to either the superintendent or the principal without us having to do it at another board meeting, if that was acceptable.
Here's where I'm struggling with it. All 4 high school principals have asked for and suggested this, and all of our middle school.
Some high schools want to be able to go 5 days.
Right. Well,
and I know there's an issue with, hey, well, will some parents be upset that this high school is going 5 days and this one going 4 days? I don't think we should hold back one high school who is ready to do this if, just because maybe the other ones are not, wanting to do it. So I would love to be able to give them that option.
And one of the things I want to avoid is having 4 different high schools kind of doing their own thing. So I get that. But if we take away the virtual day, we would retain virtual teaching. You're just talking about taking away the one virtual.
Yeah, some high schools, I think, and I'd like to hear maybe a little bit more from Dr. Jackson, but I kind of, not unlike the middle school level, Primary, the younger grades have dedicated virtual teachers. They're going 5 days a week. They don't need the dedicated virtual teachers. The high school is kind of a mixed bag as far as, they have some dedicated virtual, they have some, who do a little bit of both. Maybe you can expand on it, but that's what I understand.
You're correct. It is, we have teachers in all of our high schools who are teaching both face-to-face and virtual at the same time. Some schools, based on the number of sections available, based on the size of the school, may have more opportunity to have in a class period all virtual students or all face-to-face students in that class period. So that exists in some cases in our schools. But as we stated earlier, all of our principals have asked for the start date of the 22nd and the 29th for the middle schools. And so that's the recommendation. But again, we serve the Board of Education.
Yeah, Travis, I really appreciate your work and drive to get these kids back because you've been pushing for that. We literally have had less than 24 hours to kind of come up with this, although your team's been planning on it for a long time. And at this point, I'm much more comfortable getting it off the ground and revisiting all of these things in 3 weeks, personally.
So are we saying that at our next board meeting, we can revisit some of these issues so that we're not?
Yep, all of them. All of them.
That's acceptable. Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
If one high school says, hey, we can do 5 days in 3 weeks,
Let them do
we can,
Okay.
three
I would-
instructional weeks, we'd ask for an update on all of this, and then we could say, go for it.
I just like the option of being able to revisit it in the future.
yeah.
So what is
Yeah.
a scenario if one high school says, we think we can be open by next Friday, which is earlier than a week?
Yeah, that's not the way the motion was made. And
I
unless,
understand that, but we are giving them the option.
no,
If we use my friendly amendment,
Yeah,
we
no.
would be giving them the option.
I mean, I didn't make it, but I'm
I feel like for family planning, you've got.
Why would you start on a Friday?
Well, it's just theoretical.
Nobody wants kids back to school any worse than I do, and I'd like for them to go Monday, but I know that's not possible. So I'm saying, okay, for next Monday for high school, if that's what everybody, I wish middle schools could start at the same time as high school. But I talked to a middle school principal on my way here who says the 9 weeks is ending, grades have to be put in, and I didn't want to hear this. It was like, nope, this isn't really what I want to hear.
We would all love them back on Monday. We just know it's not possible.
Right, and I know parents want their kids back Monday.
Right.
But they said they've got to get grades put in, that all this stuff in Power School has to be changed besides the bus routes. I mean, that there's a lot of work and even though I'm saying, let's spend some CARES money, let's get this done. I'm realized that it cannot happen as quick as I'd like for it to happen.
And I agree.
So I'm willing to accept that.
But I would
Not
like,
because I didn't ask all these questions and
Yes,
No.
ma'am. Thank you.
and I would like to
for
tell you,
parents.
we have asked you a bunch of questions off the cuff, but I would like to tell you that I am so incredibly grateful to be sitting here today and so grateful to be given the chance to allow our children to go back full time. And all the work that goes behind it. I mean, I think Katie said it best. It's really easy for us to sit up here and like you said, we want them in there Monday, but we understand that there's a lot to be done in the next couple of weeks. And I'm just thrilled that we're given the opportunity and that we're kind of paving the way for a lot of school systems. I mean,
And if all we're doing is arguing about how fast we can get them back,
Right.
that's not a bad problem.
That is not a bad
Okay,
problem
and
to
we want to keep
have.
them in the most. That's
right. And
not
we
a bad
couldn't do
problem.
it without great people.
No, and we have the best.
So just a couple other questions. You mentioned, and I know parents are going to ask this too, but you mentioned, and I know a bunch of board members have this question too, the 6-foot spacing goes away in the classroom, transportation, cafeteria.
Yes, sir. So the requirements under the toolkit, and the toolkit may continue to evolve and be revised, and we will certainly pay attention to that. My assumption is that it's going to have to be revised by Senate Bill 220. However, what we're required to do is to social distance to the extent possible. And so early conversations with the principals are each school, based on their facility, is taking it on a case-by-case basis. Some may need to use the cafeteria. Some will continue to eat in the classrooms, as we are in most of our elementary schools, but they're working through that. And part of that conversation with parents is that for those parents who have that question, and that's part of their decision-making process, they'll be able to reach out to the individual school to understand what the cafeteria plans are. But specifically to the question, we're to social distance to the extent possible. And so we'll do the very best we can. Under Plan A, we can't say that's 6 feet.
Right.
And in this case, there's not a defined measurement in terms of distance between people. It's just as much as we possibly can, and that's what we're committed to doing.
And Bubba, if I can follow up on what you said, when you mentioned that the 6-foot distancing goes away, unfortunately, it does not go away for contact tracing. And so that could be very, very problematic. Yeah, everybody's within 6 foot on the bus and in the classrooms. But if we're still stuck with the 6-foot distancing, as far as contact tracing, that's going to be a problem.
And that leads right back to the concern of the nurses, because that is the rule right now, 6 feet for a cumulative 15 minutes. So you're exactly right, Mr. Day.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Okay, so when we went back to virtual with elementary kids, like 2 weeks into it, back from virtual to full-time, there were parents that wanted their kid back in the classroom. They didn't want to do the virtual after they had signed up for it. Are we going to leave that? I mean, we're not saying if somebody says, I want virtual, but 2 weeks later they say, I need to get my kid in the classroom. Are we going to be prepared to let kids come back in?
Absolutely. So the prevailing mindset of all educators I've spoken to is we want our children in the classroom. So absolutely, if 2 weeks in they want to come, and we've seen that, and we're delighted to see that and continue to see that in our elementary schools. Equally, 2 weeks in, if a parent decides, I really want my child to be virtual, they have that opportunity, and that's a part of Senate Bill 220. I have had conversation, and some of the feedback from staff is a concern that there are some cases where students really need to be in class, and they're using this I can go virtual almost as an excuse to not be present, to not do the work and that sort of thing. And so we're really encouraging parents to have their children in class, because we know that's the superior educational experience. We're doing everything we can for our virtual students, and we'll continue to do that, but we want our kids in class. And so to your question, yes, they would have that opportunity to rejoin our face-to-face cohort at the moment the parent would like for them to.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we have a friendly amendment on the floor that needs a second.
I
don't think so.
it amended.
Have we adopted it?
Katie made the motion. Travis was asking for amendment, but my understanding was that,
He made an amendment.
well, he can't make an amendment to her motion.
Neil, how does it work as far as making friendly amendments?
Well, Mr. Chairman and board members, the way Member Day presented it, it was more of a thought,
Right.
and it didn't get a second anyway. And so it's not before you for a vote on the amendment. And so that's the official way it works. But the unofficial way it works is just the way Travis presented it. He presented it as an idea for discussion. And if a majority had embraced that, then most likely Katie would have amended her own motion and the second would have amended it, but that hasn't happened. So right now, what's on the floor is Katie's motion to accept superintendent's recommendation.
So, right,
And unless there's some sort of official motion to amend that's seconded, that's the way it stands for the vote. However, it has become clear through the discussion that at your meeting on April the 13th, all of these issues are going to be revisited, at least for discussion purposes. And if the board wants to take action to change any of this, you can do it on April 13th.
and we do not need to put that in the, Okay.
You could, but I don't think so.
Okay.
The relationship between you and your superintendent is such that I think he's heard that you do want to discuss it again on April 13th, and it'll therefore be on the agenda.
perfect. We have a motion by Ms. Statler, a second by Mr. McLean. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. That passes unanimously. We're at the end of this meeting. I would like to really quickly say something. I would like to thank the children of Carteret County for sticking it out this year and letting us fight for them. Every board member fought to the best of their ability. The staff, the administrators fought for our kids. And our kids don't get enough credit or appreciation. And they have let us fight. They have been strong. And 20 years from now, when they look back on this, we lead the directive on this. I hope they look back and say, we got to spend more time with our parents. We got to read more. We got to learn about ourselves more. And they don't look back and say, it ruined me inside. So we as adults, we need to lead them down a positive road. So I appreciate all of you. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Whately, a second.
A second.
Ms. Chadwick, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. An excellent meeting.